Few games have pulled me into their emotional whirlwind so completely as Doki Doki Literature Club. Developed by Team Salvato in 2017, Doki Doki Literature Club is a game that initially masquerades as a lighthearted dating sim, but underneath this cheerful exterior is a deeply unsettling plot that will leave you with one of the most visceral experiences a game has to offer. And at the heart of that experience sits the protagonist's childhood friend Sayori. She starts the game as your typical bubbly schoolgirl, but as the story unfolds, you'll discover that she's a far more complex character than you've been led to believe, with one of the most tragic arcs I've ever encountered in a video game. In this video, we're going to look at everything the game gives us about Sayori, including her dialogue, poems, and even the music, to learn exactly what makes Doki Doki Literature Club an absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation. Hope you all enjoy. We first meet Sayori at the start of the game on our way to school. She's introduced as this overly energetic girl who's kind of an airhead, but one of our good friends nonetheless. She talks about the importance of building social skills by joining a club, and wouldn't you know it, she just so happens to be the vice president of a literature club. We're initially reluctant because we really weren't even planning on joining a club at all, much less a literature club. But Sayori already told everyone she'd be bringing in a new member, and even got one of her friends, Natsuki, to make cupcakes for the occasion. So even though we're pretty sure we're being manipulated, we don't want to let her down, and at the very least we're not going to turn down free cupcakes. So once we get to the club, Sayori introduces us to the rest of the cast. First is Natsuki, the aforementioned baker, who's always full of energy, if not a bit rough around the edges. Then we meet Yuri, who's pretty much the polar opposite, shy and reserved and always second-guessing herself to make sure she doesn't say anything wrong. Finally, there's Monika. Nothing else to say about her, she's just Monika. The first meeting mostly consists of getting to know the club members, and at the end of the day, Monika suggests a fun activity for the group. After we go home, we each need to prepare a poem that we'll share with everyone tomorrow as a way to get to know each other better. Writing poems is done through a minigame where you write for the girl of your choice by choosing words that you think they'll like the most. If you want to write for Sayori, you can choose words like romance, marriage, unrequited, and hope. Reading between the lines here suggests that there are some feelings that she might have for a special someone that haven't yet been reciprocated, but hopefully someday could be. But there's another side to her word list that's much darker, containing words like scars, pain, tears, and misery. This dual nature of Sayori's personality is something we're going to be seeing throughout the game, and while it hasn't been yet made explicit, we get our first real hints that there's more to Sayori than meets the eye when we share our poems with her the next day. During the second club meeting, Sayori shares a poem with us titled Dear Sunshine. On the surface, it seems like a fairly cheerful poem about the happiness that comes from sunny days, but the second stanza suggests something a bit deeper. She questions whether she has the strength to deal with life's rainy days on her own, but also acknowledges that even if she doesn't believe in herself, she does trust the sunshine to help her get through them. But then things take a pretty unexpected turn with the last two lines. If it wasn't for you, I could sleep forever, but I'm not mad. The use of the word could here is really interesting because it suggests that there's a real desire to sleep forever here that's being actively held back by the sunshine, which ends up making the poem seem much less hopeful than the first part would have suggested. However, when we get to her second poem, Bottles, things become much more overtly dark. In it, Sayori describes reaching inside of herself to bottle up happy thoughts so she can give them to her friends when they're feeling a certain way. But every time she does, it's like she loses a piece of herself, and she has to go deeper and deeper, digging and scraping to fill more. By the end of the poem, she's got nothing left, and the bottles fall to the ground, shattering. There's no happiness left to give, and the only things that remain are the echoes inside of her mind. The imagery here is incredibly powerful, and even the protagonist comments on how unexpected it is to see Sayori write something like this. But because the feelings described here are so at odds with the Sayori that we know, we try not to think about it too much for now. However, this side of Sayori only seems to be coming out more and more, and by the fourth meeting, it's going to become impossible to ignore. When the meeting begins, the group is discussing how to prepare for the club's contribution to the school's upcoming cultural festival. Normally, Sayori is front and center for these conversations, but today, she's sitting in the back of the room by herself. When we try to talk with her, she puts on a smile and insists that everything is okay, but we're still worried because of how out of character this behavior is for her. Monika's theory is that Sayori doesn't want to open up to us because it's her feelings for us that are on her mind, adding that she's been a much happier person since we joined the literature club, like an extra light has turned on inside her. But if you've been writing poems for Sayori up until this point, you'll unlock some extra dialogue with her where she specifically tells you that she doesn't deserve our attention, and that things would be easier if we would just spend time with everyone else instead of focusing on her. She's clearly upset, but when we try to comfort her, she quickly regains her composure, brushing off her sadness as just a little rain cloud before leaving the meeting early. But between her words and Monica's, it's obvious there's more to the story than she's letting on, so we decide to check in on her at her house over the weekend. This visit becomes a major turning point in our understanding of who Sayori is as a character when she finally opens up about her struggles with depression. She talks about feeling worthless and that she'd rather focus on making everyone else happy than having them waste their energy on her because, as far as she's concerned, she doesn't deserve that. And this is why our understanding of her poetry is so important here. As we saw from Dear Sunshine, we are one of the most important people in her life, which is presumably one of the main reasons she had us join the club in the first place. But on the other hand, her constant need to please others and keep them happy is why she immediately began to push us away, sharing us with her friends like one of her bottles of sunshine. We know that on some level she is aware of the self-destructive nature of these types of acts since she explicitly wrote about them in bottles, but it seems like what she wasn't able to anticipate was how much pain it would cause her to actually see us become closer to other people. This is a moment of real vulnerability for Sayori, and on the one hand, it's so difficult to watch someone you care about struggle like this. But on the other hand, it's also somewhat of a breakthrough, as she's finally starting to come to terms with how she really feels about us. Unfortunately though, the moment is cut short since we have to meet up with one of our clubmates to prepare for the cultural festival. We offer to have Sayori come with us, but she tells us that she'd just rather be alone right now, and that she'll see us tomorrow. But the next time we see Sayori is actually later that day, after the festival preparations are done. As the clubmate is getting ready to leave, they unexpectedly attempt to kiss us, but jump back when they notice Sayori coming. To avoid the awkwardness, they leave as quickly as possible. Sayori tries to play this moment off as a good thing, repeatedly saying that our happiness is all that matters to her, but it's obvious that she's trying to convince herself more than anyone else, and ultimately her efforts to do so fail. She breaks down and admits that she really wants to be happy for us, but the more she pushes us away, the more it feels like her heart is being ripped in half. She finally admits that she has feelings for us, and that her biggest fear is that we don't feel the same. You have a couple of options for how to respond here, and if you choose to confess your love for her, you're treated to one of the best scenes in the entire game. We tell her that because of our love for her, there's no way that she could like us more than we like her, and that while we should have realized it sooner, spending so much time in the club with her these past few days has helped us understand how we truly feel. There are many things to love about this scene, but what really sets it apart for me is the music that plays in the background, a hauntingly beautiful piece called My Confession. This is also the song that plays during the scene where Sayori first opens up to us about her depression, but it hits much harder here because of how perfect a representation it is of Sayori's arc throughout the story. It starts by drifting back and forth between these two broken chords in a way that creates this sense of wandering around with no real direction or guidance. But then, much like how the protagonist vows to offer his love and support to Sayori, we briefly switch from playing the chord notes one at a time in the bass to playing them all together. There's a ton of tension here, like we're finally done wandering and that we're ready to come to this dramatic conclusion and break free. But much like Sayori, the music doesn't quite have the strength to do so, even with our support. And that brings us back to the more somber, drifting notes from the beginning of the piece. All of the music in this game is fantastic, and it plays a pivotal role in making the experience of Doki Doki Literature Club what it is, but no piece reflects the true essence of a character or a moment quite like My Confession does for Sayori in this scene. It does such a good job capturing not only her inner turmoil, but our efforts to help her through it, however clunky they may be. But despite those efforts, and despite the fact that Sayori recognizes that this is supposed to be a moment of pure joy for her, the rain clouds still won't go away, and she doesn't understand why. We realize this is all a bit overwhelming for her, so we try to reassure her that we'll just take it day by day, starting with the cultural festival tomorrow. But unfortunately, we never actually get that chance. Because even now, after everything we've learned about Sayori, we still don't grasp the true magnitude of her pain, and we won't until it's too late. The next morning, we go to her house, expecting to start a new chapter in our lives together. But instead, we gently open the door, only to find that her story, our story, has come to a tragic end. We thought that by confessing our love to Sayori that we were being that sunshine that she wrote about in her first poem. But ultimately, Sayori's rain clouds became too much to handle, and she decided that she had no other choice but to take her own life. Sayori's death at the end of Act 1 isn't just shocking, it's devastating. And what's even worse is that regardless of your choices throughout the game, whether you decided to write poems for someone else, or whether you chose to be her best friend instead of her love interest, there's nothing you can do to stop it from happening. I purposely avoided showing the scene in this video just out of respect, but everything about it, from the totally unfiltered depiction of her body, to the music that plays in the background, and just the overall way that the scene completely changes how you view the game, makes it one of the most intense gaming experiences I've ever had, and I still get chills running down my spine every time I see it. But what makes Sayori's arc so powerful is not just the intensity of this one scene, it's how genuine and authentic her entire story feels. And that's because the game's portrayal of her depression is based on the real-life experiences of the game's creator, Dan Salvato. As someone who's personally struggled with depression for pretty much their whole life, what I found particularly striking was the way that she uses her overly energetic personality as a coping mechanism to deal with it. This is a real phenomenon sometimes referred to as smiling depression, and the way it's presented in Doki Doki Literature Club just shows a great deal of respect for the subject matter that I really appreciated. What this all means is that Sayori's arc doesn't just feel like some plot device, it feels real, like you could actually envision knowing somebody like this in real life if you don't already. This is what takes her death out of the realm of cheap shock value and instead treats it like a genuine tragedy, and that's why her story will stick with you, echoing in your mind long after the screen has faded to black. Thank you for watching.